Thanks for tuning in to Season 4 of Strange, Rare, and Peculiar Homeopathy Podcast, where homeopathy lives, breathes, and evolves with Denise Straiges and Alastair Gray. We'll be exploring modern practice, research, and philosophy, from Hahnemann's radical insights to today's breakthroughs and discoveries. Get ready for homeopathy woes, feedback from pros, and the more you knows.
Hi, everybody. Good morning
Good day, good afternoon.
and good evening for those folks that are getting ready to go to sleep.
Do you think people sleep to our podcast?
It's a miracle. This week we got a bunch of correspondence. Have you got that ready to go?
I do. I have it ready to go. First, we should introduce ourselves. Hi, I'm Denise Straiges.
And that would make me Alistair Gray. And
Yes.
we are at opposite ends of our house, our office, our rambling office. And we are going to be with you for 45 minutes or an hour or however long it takes.
We've got our cups of tea.
Mm.
Um, and
And I
to
have an announcement about the tea.
What's your announcement about the tea?
Yeah, well, because I was one of the delightful things I got to do this week was
Mm.
to spend some time with some Brits, and they were stragglers arriving in the in this tutorial I was giving, and one of them said, "What are you drinking?" And I said, "Oh, I've just got a cup of tea." And she said, "What sort of tea?" And I said, "Naughty Vicar."
Uh-huh.
And she said, "Oh, that's hilarious." And a few other people were listening and they laughed because it's kind of, pretty an amusing um, type of tea, naughty vicar. And then someone said, "Oh, that's a play on words." And everyone listened. And she said, "Yeah, it comes from the Vicar of Dibley, 1990s, British TV, Morty Vicar." And it's exactly what you would say when the vicar comes to call, because you would say, "Come on in. Have some tea? Yes, more tea, Vicar." And so it was decided that the naughty vicar comes from probably a mistranslation of more tea, Vicar.
While I think that is a plausible explanation, I think that there is something about the naughtiness that really is intentional. But anywho, thanks for that, though. I like it. And we love the Naughty Vicar tea. They don't sponsor us. Although they did send a couple of pounds of tea for when we had our gala fundraiser last year.
They did too. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so here's how today's going to roll. We have two announcements. We then have some people are now writing in, which is really fun. So we're going to go over the comments to episode 110. And then we have a topic I'm kind of excited about, and it's sort of one of the things that we're getting feedback about is around how the people are appreciating sort of a greater understanding of homeopathy and sort of moving beyond an overly simplistic definition. And so, one of the things that we'll be following through during this season, which is entitled Truth, is looking at different aspects of homeopathy, whether it be the prescribing, whether it be the remedy reactions, whether it be sort of misappropriations of language, and today we're going to talk about one of the parts of the manufacturing process, trituration, which will be exciting. And then following that, we'll sort of wrap up with a sort of look at how an oversimplification of homeopathy has created a buzz and lots of excitement, and yet there's a downstream effect. So we're going to talk about that as well. How's that sound? So
I
let's
love it.
start with, okay, so the first thing is these comments to 110. So let's just start with someone who um, listened, but apparently hates homeopathy. So why not start with that? This is a gentleman whose name is Thomas E, and his surname starts with the letter S. I'm not going to give people's last names because they didn't give us consent to say their names on. So I'll just give the first and last initial. He says, "Do you mean the side that says it's all quackery? The fact that duck liver doesn't cure anything? The fact that many of the quote medicines are poison? That the packaging basically says this stuff doesn't work?" So there's that. So we got the haters. I mean, like, what do we even say? Like, what I would say to Thomas is, you do you, man. Right? Like, don't waste your time listening to us.
Mm.
Right? We're actually here. Thomas, we could probably have some amazing conversations because we're actually asking questions about this whole season is about uncovering the truth. And the truth, whenever you're asking about the truth, you have to deal with some unpopular attitudes from inside the house. And we're committed to doing that. So, Thomas, if you're listening, keep listening because, who knows? You may have something that would be helpful for us to learn. It doesn't really help to just make declarative statements in the form of a question. That doesn't take us anywhere. And I'm not going to spend time like we're not going to refute all that, but keep listening, bud. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. All right, now let's get on to some other ones, right? So this is Jennifer, also surname starts with an S, and she says, sometimes, actually very often, all caps, nothing happens rather than, quote, curing. So this is not 100% my experience. Even if you get approving, it strengthens the vital force, according to Hahnemann.
Yeah, go slowly with this one because this is good.
Yeah.
Did you just say that often the
So
vital force is strengthened through doing provings?
so she's saying a couple things. Actually, let me put this into context. So,
Yep.
the episode 110, one of the things that we talked about was this idea of that which does not cure proves, which is that is a very what I did with that statement is I sort of gathered together a number of things that Hahnemann talks about with regard to how medicinal substances always act. And he's saying that in comparison to how natural diseases don't always affect everyone because of individual susceptibility. And so
Yep.
he's talking about his intention there is to say that when you are working with a medicinal substance, it actually does have an action on the person.
And
Now,
unconditional action on the person.
unconditional action. Now, whether or not the person experiences that, right? Whether or not they notice it, whether or not it affects them in a positive or negative way. Well, if it's a proving symptom, then it's not going to be necessarily in a positive way because it would be a symptom that shows that the remedy is acting in such a way that it's not related to how the person needed cure. It actually is related to the remedy and what its capacity is. But one of the things that you learn from doing provings is that each person, so a really good proving will have a number of people participating, and then you have to bring together their experiences. I love how Jeremy Sher talks about it and writes about it. He says it's the experience as if one person. In other words, there's a way in which you look at the sort of through the prism of people of different ages, genders, backgrounds, miasmatic predisposition, all of the things. And then you see through looking through that prism what a remedy has the capacity to do. And what you find when you're involved in provings is that it's true that some people don't have any perceptible reaction sometimes. And one of the things that's really interesting about participating in a proving, one of the things that was surprising to me with one of my first provings, where I was actually a prover, not just a supervisor, but a person who took the remedy, was to be at the what's referred to as the proving extraction. So it's a meeting where all of the provers come together and talk about what their experience was during that clinical trial. And, the laws say you don't talk to each other before then. And so you don't know what's happening to other people. And when you come together and you hear about the experiences of other people, and you realize many of the symptoms are similar or the same. But also, I think the thing that really was a lesson to me as a person, as an observer of my own experience, was when I sat in as a prover, hearing the experience of other provers and realizing that things happened to me that I did not document because I didn't really think of them as being a
Mm.
symptom because sometimes they're not a big deal. Like one of the symptoms I've mentioned on here before, just from a proving, was a sensation of a burnt tongue, right? Like as if you ate hot pizza or soup or something. Well, you wouldn't think of that as being like, oh, I'm so sick, my tongue feels burnt. It's like I have a little burnt sensation on the tongue. So what happens is you will have experiences or symptoms, things will change within the body, and some of them will be very benign and they will go unnoticed. Some of them you might think, oh, I must have eaten something bad last night. That's why I've had diarrhea or whatever the case may be, right? So that's
Interesting
that.
that to think about proving symptoms. I want to hear what the rest of her comment is, but when it comes to proving symptoms, the really important thing is not necessarily the overlap, because you're totally right. It's kind of interesting, and everyone enjoys it when they realize that their skin symptom or their hair loss or their poop is was mirrored by other people's experiences. But actually, what's more important are characteristic symptoms. And so,
Yeah.
very often, the characteristic symptom of one prover turns out to be the thing,
Yeah.
the symptom, which is most notable.
Well, and here's another thing. So, Jennifer says, very often nothing, all caps, happens rather than curing. So then that's actually a great statement, right? Because that means that the remedy was well indicated and well chosen, and anything else that might have happened, like an accessory symptom, was negligible enough to not have made an impact such that the person noticed it. So that's actually good. That's actually a great experience. That's what we want, right? Is to have that beautiful match where the symptoms are alleviating. But the other thing is, there are times, and we see this all the time in our clinical teachings, but also in our own practices. A client will report back, like for example, I'll, after I see a new client, recommend a remedy and then say, take the remedy, however, and then report back to me in 7 to 14 days, depending on what the situation is. And let me know how things are going, because I want to make sure that that everything is moving in a good direction. Anyway, 7 out of 10 times people will say nothing happened, right? And I've had so many times where people will say nothing happened, and then I'll say, okay, well, let's have a conversation, and then you have a conversation and find out that a whole lot of things have happened,
Mm.
right? Because I think that, learning to be a really accurate reporter of our state of being is different than we might think, right? So I had a case one time where I saw this young gal and she had severe headaches, really severe headaches. She had a number of symptoms, but she had severe headaches. And so when she, comes for her follow up and, I'm like, how are you doing? Nothing changed. Okay. So I'm assuming she's getting headaches, every day as she had been. I go through, it turns out that a number of things had moved in her case. And she was, having lots of response to the remedy. But then in the end, I assumed she was still having headaches. And I was like, okay, let me have it. Tell me about your headaches. And she's like, oh, oh, I actually haven't had any headaches in a while. It's like, okay, so something did happen. So, sometimes things happen. So this is the conversation, if you didn't hear episode 110, was about this idea of like curing like, and that when a remedy is needed, that cure can happen. When a remedy isn't needed, there is a potentiality of proving of developing the symptoms of the remedy. Now, if you take a remedy if you have an acute and you try a couple of remedies that don't work, it's not going to happen because the vital force is in a do or die mode. It's going to take whatever it can or reject whatever it can't use because it wants to survive. The aperture is closed, and it's really important that the remedy do what it does. And you've got all kinds of leeway in terms of, going, okay, that didn't work. Let me try this. Let me try that. That's in an acute. But when you are working with someone who has a complex chronic disease, you do not have that kind of leeway. And the choice of the remedy and the watching of the progress is really important. And the reason that we're talking about this sort of potential for provings goes is that the way that people are prescribing today, which is giving tons of remedies at a time or combination remedies with dozens, if not hundreds of remedies included in them, the likelihood of an adverse event goes up exponentially. And look, if that's what you want to do and you're fully informed about it, then you do you. Like, we're not here to tell anybody what to do. However, because of the lack of education in homeopathy and because there are practitioners on the scene and people opening schools who are teaching stuff that's insane, there should be clarity about what homeopathy is, what it isn't, what the medicines are, what they aren't, what the indicated use is for safe and effective prescribing, and what it isn't. And then people get to make their own choices, you know? Like if somebody wanted to go and like get into a tub of water and have the leeches come and, like prick at their skin or whatever because they believe it's going to have some healing benefit, do it. right? Like, far be it from me to say don't do it. Like, I'm all for people doing whatever they want. I am also all for, because we have seen evidence of harm. We feel that it's really important to let people know what we're seeing so that those who want to abide by best practices are going to wind up in a better place rather than not. So if you don't like this, like that's totally fine. Like you do you. We're not judging. But if you're going to do it to somebody else, then it's on your conscience and potentially on all of our practices because we could all get in trouble for someone's action. Anyway, okay, now here's the other thing though. Jennifer also says even if you get approving, it strengthens the vital force according to Hahnemann.
That's interesting. And uh, uh, Um, I'm not sure about that because we're talking about two different types of proving. He definitely says do provings that makes you healthier,
Yep,
but those are I'm a healthy person and I am
yep,
being stimulated by a substance and the vital force is straining and stressing back against it, or stressing and straining. And the resilience created in doing that and doing it again and again, I would agree in my own experience. And that's exactly what Hahnemann says. But he doesn't say it about the other type of proving that you were just talking about, which
exactly.
is where an unhealthy person is taking a medication, taking a homeopathic medication, an artificial disease, and develops proving symptoms because of taking too much of that medication. That's
Right.
a very different situation, and I don't think so.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not so sure
totally.
that in that situation, the proving symptoms of an unhealthy person in treatment makes the vital force more resilient.
In fact, just the opposite. Think about if the woman in the beginning of 110, who's the episode of 110 where she was talking about going from having Crohn's disease to now having a seizure disorder and PPP,
Yeah.
right? So like not great. I don't know if I can say this right now. You might be able to say it better, and it might be that we find it might be in Jeremy Scher's Dynamic Provings book, or not, sorry, not Dynamic Provings, what's the Methodology of Provings book. And this is so Al and I have both participated in a number of provings and a couple of doozies, some really the ones where you need to give consent because the substance is so potentially toxic that you can't in good conscience go in blind. So one of the provings, the one I'm about to talk about, it turned out that the substance was not a radioactive as it was potentially going to be, but it was one of three. So it was a triple blind proving, except that one of the three that were a potential, could have been a substance that would have really stunk. Anyway, it turned out that the substance wasn't anything really. It would seem on its surface quite benign. Anyway, what I want to say is the symptoms that I had were really tough, and I thought I was having a heart attack, and I wound up in the emergency room and there was no there was no evidence of frank pathology. The symptoms were there.
Mm.
I remember being terrified by that, and Jeremy explaining to me, Jeremy Scher, who, if you don't know him, he has conducted I don't know how many provings, 40 some provings, and wrote a book on proving methodology, and has I think he's done a really beautiful job in over the years really getting into kind of putting out really good provings and good methodology. I think he's sort of evolved into it so beautifully. Some of those remedies are amazing. I mean, some of them I would say they're probably all amazing. I don't know all of them, so I guess anyway. But what he explained to me, which was really helpful, was that what happened to me was an energetic disease, not a material disease. But what it showed was my susceptibility. And so when I was a participant in this proving, so take a healthy person, healthy enough person, taking a remedy as part of a clinical trial to determine what that remedy does. That is what happened to me. It happened to two other people as well, right? And he said, well, that what that demonstrates is your susceptibility. So this is to the point that Jennifer was making about when you participate in a proving as a healthy person, it strengthens the vital force. That would have meant that I went through this process of my my body organizing around how to not potentially get this particular thing for which I was greatly susceptible. And so I would have gone through that process, not against an organic pathology or degradation of my own body, but rather just the energetic disease. Didn't make it any less unpleasant, but that's the part that can be strengthening. Now, there are people who have gotten sick from provings and had a really hard time getting out of it. There are people who've done too many provings and have lived to regret it. And so when we make blanket statements, we need to understand the nuances of it. So to wrap up what Jennifer had said, she approving, Hahnemann says it strengthens the vital force. The demonstration would be that when a healthy person experiences something, it's entirely possible that the working out the kinks with the energetic disease and not a material disease is actually a benefit and makes us stronger, right? Okay, that's true. Also true is a person who does too many provings or takes too many remedies, especially if they are not in decent health and aware of the effect and impact of those remedies at every stage, could put themselves in a difficult spot. All right. I hope, Jennifer, I hope that that helps. And I love that we're getting to have these conversations. So again, thanks for asking about it. Next one, Al, I want you to answer. And this is Michael M., who says just a statement. Every aggravation is approving, followed by amelioration.
Sorry, no.
Yeah, that'd be a hard no.
Yeah, that's a hard no, and the
But
reason is because of the interplay, the removal of one word and the insertion of another word that means something completely different.
yeah,
So, an aggravation, by definition, is a magnification of something that was already there, and approving symptom is a symptom that was not there, which can be ascribed to the substance that the person's been taking. And to determine that, you need the proving document, the manual, and you'll need a materia medica. And so, by definition, those two things cannot be the same. So, read it to me again.
he says every aggravation is approving, followed by amelioration, full stop.
No. And so the next part of the no is an aggravation is an aggravation. And that means a person has some symptoms. In a clinical situation, a person has a bunch of symptoms. They go to the homeopath. The homeopath listens to the story. They determine the totality of characteristic symptoms. They look through their books and the different tools that they've got, maybe the repertory, and they choose, they find the best match. And the best match is then given. Now, there can be.
Okay, wait, I have to interrupt you for a second because you're making the assumption that this person is seeing a homeopath who actually is practicing homeopathy. Because the other thing is people will look at a protocol book and give a whole bunch of remedies or give this home accord business with a whole bunch of potencies or just give a lot of remedies to do some sort of faux detox. So all of those things could be true leading up to what Michael said.
As I said, a homeopath
All right, a homeopath. Okay,
does
good.
what
You
I
did say.
said,
Okay, sorry, the
and,
distinction
and
between
then
homeopath.
and then they take a remedy.
Yeah.
Now, there are an array of different reactions. There's basically only four, but there's four different possible reactions. One of them is an aggravation. And traditionally, in some homeopathic literature, an aggravation is to be celebrated. An aggravation is never celebrated by the person that's having the aggravation.
You
But
got it.
sometimes the homeopath might do a little dance because it's very often, according to the fourth edition of homeopathy, a good sign. And what happens is that the existing symptoms get worse temporarily for the short term and then get better and much better. And then over the ensuing hours, weeks, and months, the client has a relief of their symptoms. That is the traditional aggravation. And if it happens the way that I just described, it usually involves some discomfort for the person that's got the symptoms, but it's always good. And
Now
so,
that and so Hahnemann was trying to rid that as the sort of birthright experience of someone who's using homeopathy. So as I'll mention, that's the fourth edition of the Organon. And that is based on the premise of give a dose of the remedy, usually well, at that point, a dry dose of the remedy, and then wait, right? And so you give the dose, and then the trajectory of a positive trajectory would be amelioration followed by aggravation followed by amelioration. Okay. And there could be short amelioration followed by aggravation by long-term amelioration. But Hahnemann said that's a problem because he was looking for rapid and gentle cure, emphasis being on the gentle. And so as he moved into the fifth and sixth editions of the Organon, he was working to get away from aggravation as being something positive. So an aggravation is not improving, it's an exacerbation of something that's already there. Okay. And I'll just talk a little bit about how, if people are interested in learning about remedy reactions, where they could do such a thing.
They could read that book there, that one,
What are you pointing at?
my case management book.
Oh, I don't, you know what? Your background is blurred. So Alastair wrote a book called Case Management. I was like, what are you pointing at? It's behind him on his bookshelf. So his case management book actually describes this and it gives you lots of different places that you can go to. But if you're talking about fourth edition prescribing, give a dose and wait, then those remedy reactions you can find, if you don't read Al's book, it's in Vitolcus writes about it, and also Kent's remedy reactions.
Yeah.
And so people who have qualified as a homeopath, these are often considered as a part of the like the things that you need to know moving forward to get, to get into being certified or licensed or whatever. The
It's
thing
rather, yeah,
is,
go.
well, the thing is, if you're following what Hahnemann ultimately did, he moved in the fifth and sixth editions of the Organon, he moved away from that give a dose and wait idea and understood that the curing of chronic diseases requires repetition of the remedy, but given in a very particular way, in water and with great, judicious detail. Judicious detail. That doesn't make
Judicious
any sense.
detail. Um, in
But
addition
yeah,
to the aggravation, what I just spoke about,
yeah,
and separate to that, it is possible to get other reactions. And another reaction is where the person with symptoms goes to the homeopath. The homeopath is not throwing a truckload of remedies or protocols or anything like that, but is doing the job of a homeopath and taking the totality of characteristic symptoms and gives a remedy. Now,
yep, yep.
there are at times the circumstance where the client starts to improve or their symptoms start to improve, and then they develop a symptom, and the symptom is not something that they've had before. And the symptom is, perhaps um, loud enough to come to their attention. They'll tell the homeopath. The homeopath's job then becomes, I now need to look at the literature to find out if this new symptom or this potential new symptom that the client's speaking about is related to the remedy itself.
That's right.
This happens in fourth or fifth, or in fact, sixth edition prescribing because it's not related to necessarily the accuracy of the remedy. In my experience, it's usually about the amount of times that the remedy's been taken, and
That's right.
usually it's an inaccurate remedy taken too often, which creates both the aggravation and the proving symptom. But the proving symptom, all you need to do is really look at the manual, the proving manual, and you'll find, oh yeah, that's interesting. The
Yep.
headache behind the left eye, there it is. In the as if one person that Denise talked about before, the proving profile or the remedy profile, and there's that symptom, and that's the symptom that the client's talking about since they took that remedy. That's a proving symptom,
Yep.
easily dealt with.
Amazing. So Michael, I think that you're on the right track in what you're thinking about. It's just a little bit of a language differential. So it's the aggravation is approving followed by amelioration it's that's not quite true. But if you're talking about a fourth edition prescription, then that aggravation followed by amelioration is said to have been a positive remedy reaction. Next thing, and actually this is taking longer than I thought, but we've just got one more, and then we'll get into the other material that we have prepared. And that is, so this is Christopher G. And he says, when a quote proving is being done, are they only done with quote healthy subjects and using potentized substances? I
Yes.
realize they can't use herbal potencies with poisonous substances, but I have taken remedies which have done nothing in order to see if there's a reaction. I always understood that a remedy will work if it is a good match and the overall to the overall picture, or at least a partial match.
You got to understand, Christopher, that you're talking about two different things as if they're the same thing. And one is that, in my experience, I've taken. It sounds like you have, from an unhealthy perspective or a perspective with symptoms, been taking a remedy, as opposed to the proving, which you described perfectly at the very beginning,
Yep.
which is where healthy folks, or as healthy as humanly possible, um, take a homeopathically prepared remedy to see what symptoms are created.
Right.
Those are two very different starting points, and I think it really goes to answer the question that you've raised. Doing the same thing from those two different starting positions creates very different subsequent circumstances. There's various metaphors I can give you, but if you're thinking that, for example, a state of health is a pendulum which is hanging from the ceiling and just very, very gently yielding and reacting to the different breezes that are coming along, will be seeking its balance at all times, depending on the stimulus which has moved it off of its center. But that's not what a an unhealthy person in a clinical situation experiences, because the unhealthy person in the clinical experience, their pendulum is off, and their pendulum is already over here and stuck and awaiting a stimulus to get it to start to swing again. And I think from an understanding of those two separate circumstances will really help.
There's some language that comes to my mind that I thought about this because students often will ask in the beginning of their studies, well, if provings are only done on healthy people, what is a healthy person? Are there healthy people? And like we all start measuring almost like our level of health. And the word that has come to my mind around this is a resilient person, because we all have our junk, right? But the question is, are we resilient enough to bounce back if we are artificially thrown off our center? So that's one, to me, it's a bit like Al, what you're talking about with the pendulum,
Mhm.
right? But changing the word health to resilience, I really like. Another part of it is just to think about approving, and approving is it's an intentional situation. And so there is a lot of guidance. So every person who is participating, their baseline case has been taken, either their homeopath is their supervisor watching the whole thing, or their supervisor, if not their homeopath, doesn't know their case, takes their case to get a baseline of health to understand their relative health and resilience, and also to be able to be an objective observer in the documentation process. So the prover and the provers and the supervisors are meant to meet very, very frequently in the beginning, with less frequency as the effects of the remedy are wearing off. But and the proving supervisors will be asking very specific questions to make sure that the prover themselves is noticing what is happening, so that we do get as much robust information as we can. All right. So I think, is there that? Yeah, I think that we covered that.
We
So
did a really lovely. I just want to shout out to the writer from New Zealand that was wrote that really lovely message to us.
what was the, oh yeah, what was that one? Let me see, do I still,
It was a really lovely message which came earlier in the week, just about how traversing some of the challenges of homeopathy practice, as it's emerging in far-flung places, that she was very appreciative
oh,
of our
yeah.
comments.
I wonder, where do we have that? That would be a lovely one to read. Well, I don't have it available to me right at the moment, but okay. So, um, so along with this, right? So for those who are listening to us, I really appreciate it because it's it's a signal to us that people are interested in really understanding what homeopathy is about and what it does. And while we all who are involved in homeopathy love the attention that homeopathy is getting now. It's a double-edged sword because they're along with the um, interest is it's the wild, wild west, and anybody can call themselves a homeopath, and anything can be called a homeopathic remedy at this point. And so, um, yeah, so the fact that you're listening, we really appreciate that because we don't do this for money. We are we're doing this as just a way to bring information to the community. Although I did think of something. We were supposed to make announcements and we didn't. We jumped right into it. But speaking of money, we do have a school. Although most of what we do is we're not for profit. So I suppose, but I thought about the business part of it. But we are not for profit. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, it's you can go to advancehomeopathy.org. And Alastair and I founded the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy. Actually, 11 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Yep, 11 years ago, we founded the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy. And part of what we do is research and education. And the education and research are within the advocacy space around bringing the truth about homeopathy to the public as best we can. So we appreciate that. If you're interested, like if you like our teaching and this sort of, quest for truth and best practices, please come to our open house, March 25th at 7 p.m. We'll put it in the show notes as well. That's 7 p.m. Eastern time. But if you comment, we'll get you all the information. You can follow us on social media, and it'll be listed there, and you can RSVP there. But that's about anybody who's interested in studying with us. AHE it's a boutique educational experience. We are small group classes. We've never had a group that's even been 40 people in one group. It's all about personalized attention, really making sure that everybody who is practicing homeopathy knows what they're doing so that they are safe and their clients are safe. And when you know what you're doing, when you're good at it, guess what? You build a really great practice because people get better. So that's coming up. Also, if you are interested in getting homeopathy care, so our not-for-profit we has as a part of it, Homeopathy Help Now. So you can go to homeopathyhelpnow.com, and we have appointments for acute care as well as chronic care, complex care, and palliative and end of life care. And everybody is vetted for their capacity to do this job. You're not just getting thrown in with like some first semester student or whatever. We've got, if you are working with a student, they are very, very, very closely supervised and are only unleashed to the public after they have demonstrated that they can do the job and somebody is with them 100% of the time. Anybody who is seeking care for something chronic or complex, we have a practitioner review committee where we've got two medical doctors, a naturopath, a nurse practitioner, and me, actually, a professional homeopath. And we interview and vet anybody who is going to be seeing clients through this part of our network. And again, we're not for profit, and all of the proceeds go either toward homeopathy education, providing care grants, or promoting homeopathy research. So, okay, those are the announcements I was meant to make. It's like having a commercial in the middle of the podcast. So, so one of the things, so we've got a couple things on the agenda, as I mentioned before, and one of them is just about sort of, like what is a homeopathic remedy and how is it made?
Hmm.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit the last time about, how they're referred to as ultra dilutions. And one of the things that I feel like is missing from that conversation or from that definition is a very important part of the operation of making the remedy, and that is trituration. Yeah. And so, Al, do you want to just talk a little bit about, kind of the aphorism 270, how a remedy is made?
Yeah, sure.
I'm gonna get my mortar and pestle. Oh, sorry, Zay. Stepped on my dog.
So it's a great question. Oh,
Yeah.
look at that cute little
Yeah.
one.
Isn't this cute?
Yeah. So the bottom part there is the mortar, and the pokey bit is the pestle. And one of the things that Hahnemann wrote about aphorism 20 and then 21 is his understanding and conception of what a homeopathic remedy is. And from the get-go, he says something along the lines of, I'm going to paraphrase it, that what we are doing here is liberating the spirit out of something which is matter, liberating the spirit from matter. And if you think about that use of language and then think about how one might do that, then you go, well, something mechanical has got to take place to do that. To talk about liberating spirit out of matter in a way lends itself to a long and kind of interesting conversation about modern physics and the way in which matter and energy can be um, described and the relationship between the two. But let's just stick to the 18th century, late 18th century, and think about how he might have gone about that.
Wait,
Well, how he went about.
I just want to interrupt for 1 second because he doesn't necessarily talk about the liberation of spirit from matter there, because he's talking about the provings there, a little bit about how you can't understand what a remedy does unless it acts upon a human person. But it's aphorism 269, which is the liberation from
Yep.
the material substance. So anyway, in case people are fact checking along the way. Anyway, do proceed, sir. Do proceed.
So you
Oh,
get
I
a
broke
mortar,
your train. I'm sorry.
you get a mortar, you get a pestle, and you need 100 grains of sugar of milk. And when he is describing that, he's talking about the type of milk sugar that is either in powdered form or eventually can become pellet form. And that's the way in which we would often have our homeopathic remedy dispensed. But either way, you need a small mountain of milk sugar, powder ideally, and the measurement is he uses is 100 grains. Now that is then divided into three, and so what you need is a clock. What you need is a mortar, a pestle, a porcelain spatula, and um, and a strong wrist, and
Yep.
off you go. And so you take the first third and you put the first third of the powder into your mortar and pestle, and take one part, wait, and take one part of the substance that you are um, manufacturing. And that could be the daffodil that's outside in your yard that you've squeezed and the juice out of and is sitting in a jar in liquid, or it could be a piece of a precious metal that you want to run up into potency. But either way, one part, two, the first third of 100 grams, so that's 33 grains of milk sugar, and off you go.
And
Grind
then
and scrape.
grind and scrape either 6 minutes, 4 minutes, or 7 minutes, 3 minutes for about an hour.
Wait, and no, wait,
Oh,
no. So you do that for two cycles, 7 minutes,
oh,
three
right.
minutes of
Sorry.
scraping. The
Yes.
reason for the three is because when you grind, you'll realize that everything goes up the sides of the mortar, and Hahnemann had some sort of practical thing to say about that. Then get the spatula
Yeah.
and just put it all, scrape it back down so that it's in the bottom of the mortar and pestle. And then you do that again for another 7 minutes and then 3 minutes. And that equals 20 minutes. And then you get the
Good
second
technique.
third
Yep.
of the milk sugar, and you put that into the mortar and the pestle, and off you go again. Grind and scrape for another 20 minutes. And then you get the third and put that into the mortar and the pestle, and grind and scrape for 7 minutes, and then 3 minutes, 7 minutes, and then 3 minutes. And that's three lots of 20 minutes. That equals an hour of your life on the clock,
Yep.
and
You're on.
you've got a
Yep.
sore wrist. And that's where some Herculean homeopaths in times past have been very proud of their trituration muscle. And early days of photography back in the 1800s, there's some pretty funny photos around of homeopaths flexing. So that is then collected into a jar. These days we would put it into a jar and we would write on the lid of the jar or on the side of the jar 1C. And you've created a a dilution of 1 to 100. And then you do it again. You take one drop, usually the end of a knife, one part of that into the bottom of the mortar, and then your second mountain of milk sugar divided into three, and you do it again. And you do that again for 20 minutes, second, third for 20 minutes, third for 20 minutes. That's 2 hours on the clock. That now is one part to 10,000, and that is therefore denoted as a 2C
Yep.
in a separate jar. And you get rid of all of the contents of the mortar, and then you do it again. And you
Yep.
do that third process, which takes another hour of your life. And you've at the end of that process, you've got a sore bicep, you've got a fist like you've been holding onto the wheel of a sailing ship, and you have created a 3C, 1 to 1 million, one part to 1 million. So 1 to 100, 1 to 10,000, and then 1 to 1 million. And that constitutes then the starting point for the attenuation process. And
That's
the
the dilution
attenuation
and
process
percussion. Yeah.
is in liquid. Now that's it. I think I've taken a bit of time to go through that because that process is not often discussed. And very often people think that the way you make a homeopathic remedy is you get the daffodil, because I'm looking outside at the first daffodil of the year, and you bring it inside and you chop it up and you mush it and then you squeeze out the juice. And one part of the juice goes into your 99 drops of alcohol and you run it up into potency in that way. But that's not the case. You manufacture it through trituration to liberate the spirit from the matter
That's
for
right.
3 hours. Now, Hahnemann changed his mind, as he sometimes did, and he didn't talk about that process for the plants and for some of the animal products. He said that you did that process that I've just described only for the insoluble minerals,
Right.
the milks, the
Yep.
enzymes, and the secretions.
Yep.
And then he changed his mind. Yeah, go.
That's right. And that's the important thing. So that's a purpose of what we wanted to bring out today is that it's really important that as homeopathy gains in popularity, we understand what it is that we're doing and how a medicine needs to be made. And so if the part that makes a homeopathic medicine active is dependent upon this liberation of the spirit from the matter, and that takes place in the trituration phase, to not perform that trituration or to not perform it appropriately changes completely the potential efficacy of what the substance is meant to do medicinally. And until such time as we have measurement for the spirit that is extracted from matter, we've got to just work with what Hahnemann told us. But what's also important about that is that, like, if we're talking about this idea of truth, yeah, there's so many parts of homeopathy that we need to understand. So how a remedy is made, if you only are looking at the beginning parts, as Alastair said, you're not thinking about the fact that Hahnemann later, after the third edition, well, starting in chronic diseases, Hahnemann changes the preparation instructions to say that you must triturate even a soluble substance. So as Al mentioned before, he's like, a trituration, a succussion is also a trituration. In other words, you don't have to grind and scrape for 3 hours to do this. You just, you know, if it's a soluble substance, you just start with the dilution and succussion. Then he goes, oh no, actually, that's not true. All substances should be triturated, right? Even a soluble substance should be triturated. And he goes and he talks about this again and again and again, subsequent to his explorations into the nature of chronic disease. And he says, if you look at the chronic diseases, it's chronic diseases, their peculiar nature and their homeopathic cure. And that evolution of his thinking, it's not just the philosophy, but also the medicines and their preparation. He changes which medicines he's emphasizing, and he also perfects the preparation methodology. And then he takes it one step further when he gets into the 50 millesimolar potency, but we'll talk about that another time.
I think it's amazing to consider this idea. These days, I think probably pharmacists or compounding pharmacists would describe the starting substance.
Yep.
What are we starting from? And when you think about the array of substances that are used in homeopathy, where the medicinal process that I've described goes through, there's thousands of plants, there's some venoms, and there's some minerals, or
Yep.
I'd say these days, probably all of the minerals up until deep into the radioactives on the periodic table. And but there's also other substances as well. And when you start thinking about, well, hang on just a minute. I said, oh, daffodil, right? But what's the important part of the daffodil from a
Right.
medicinal point of view? Is it the flower? Is it the dew? Is it the bulb? Is it the stem? And therefore, you
Or
know,
is it the whole plant
or is it
together?
all right, or is it all of those parts?
Well, one of
And
the things that Hahnemann talks about, though, is that I think part of what he appreciated about the mineral kingdom is that you could understand what you've got. You've got you've got a chemical substance and it is what it is, what it is, whereas a plant substance would change in so many ways. Just as a little cul-de-sac, I remember that conference that I presented at in Sibiu in Transylvania
mm,
in 2019, 18, 19, something like that. There was a woman who presented ahead of me, and she was an herbalist and a chemist. And she had done this huge study where she was looking at, it was sort of a call to action for ensuring that the plant substance you think you have is what you actually have. And she demonstrated by showing different plants that were quite similar, grown near to each other, and how making a mistake in the harvesting of one or the other or the cross pollination changed the herbal medicinal power significantly
yeah,
and rendered some things poisonous and so on and so forth. So Hahnemann really addressed that. So if you're interested in this conversation, you can go back and look at our single remedy podcast, which we recorded like sometime not that long ago. I'm going to say in the fall, in autumn of 2025. But what we talk about there is how Hahnemann was as part of the conversation about why there's a single remedy, he also talked about why he considered trying sort of mineral combinations and what that could look like and why he did that. And he references in that whole segment about why you have to be more careful with plants.
yeah.
Anyway, off
Have
the
I told you
cul-de-sac.
about my adventure with Morton Bofik
Oh yeah, talk about that. I think you did recently.
on the podcast,
I think so, but do it again.
jumping over the fence?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean, I think one of the examples you could get, well, I think is really important. Oh, let me give you the slightly longer story. If there are some really amazing provings in homeopathy, as you can imagine, and some enthusiastic provers, especially in the 1800s, in the mid 1800s.
Yeah.
And there are some stories of really great provings being done of snake venoms that had been collected. And, the enthusiastic homeopath hears that the neighbor's got a snake that they've caught or cornered, and they run over there with a jar to extract some venom and do so, and then run back and gather together the folks and let's do a proving. We've got some venom here, and they'll make up a homeopathic remedy and take it. And um, so many of those stories with good provings leading to clear symptom pictures don't have an origin story. In other words, no one bothered to find out exactly what the starting substance was. Oh, it was a black snake. No, it
Right.
wasn't. It was a brown snake. It wasn't. It had a yellow stripe down the side. And there's enough evidence in homeopathy to cast doubt on the vipers and the asps in particular. That means that we can't necessarily rely on the on the proving information being related to that starting substance. Now, in my own experience of this was enthusiastically jumping over the fence one night after midnight at the Sydney Botanic Gardens, which is a pretty special place, because I knew that there was a really lovely tree and it's a unique tree. And I thought to myself at the time, I wouldn't do it these days for various reasons. I was kind of surprised or somewhat surprised that I ended up thinking that um, proving a tree would be a useful thing to do.
Well,
But
also you were more limber and able to jump over the fence.
well, that's true. Also,
Sorry. Also true.
yeah. But anyway, the story is that I collected some bark, sap, a leaf or two, some berries, and part of the root of a Moreton Bay fig tree, and which is just a classic Australian seaside, beachside tree that is
It's
has so many
amazing.
amazing characteristics. And so I did, and I did that. I then went back home, got into my hazmat suit with my rubber gloves and alcohol, did the process of um, putting all of that information, chopping it and then squeezing it through cheesecloth, extracting the juice, creating the mother tincture, and that became the starting substance. And then, and a couple of weeks later, I was having a conversation with somebody about that experience, and they said, "Yeah, the Port Jackson fig."
Oh no, you didn't talk about this
I
part.
went, "What?" And she said, "Yeah. It's really hard to distinguish a Moreton Bay fig tree from a Port Jackson fig tree." And I'm going, "Oh shit," because by that time I've got a proving group lined up and the
Yeah,
process is going through. So I did it again. It's like, returning to the scene of the crime.
right, right,
Drove
as one
down,
always
drove down at 1
does.
o'clock in the morning, jumped the fence,
Oh my
and
God.
went down and found the plaque. And there was a plaque at the bottom of the tree that said Moreton Bay fig tree. And I, dusted
Excellent.
myself off and
Wait
had
a second. If you were just going back for confirmation, why didn't you just like get a ticket and go during the day? I mean, we've been to that botanic garden and it's really nice. You can
I
go in the
needed
afternoon. It's like $10,
I needed to
right?
know. I had to know.
But
I
at one
needed to
o'clock in
know.
the morning, okay.
Yeah.
Well, but I think okay, so and this is a point that's important because we've got some critters that we don't know what they are, or some of the rust. I remember our dear friend Franz Vermeulen, who you know is one of my favorite people. He delivered a lecture at the Joint American Conference a couple of years ago where he said, "Oh yeah, there's one of the plants in the rust family that maybe isn't what you think it is," and it was like, it was like people had heard that there was no Santa Claus. I mean, it was just, and so I think that the amount of critical thinking that we need to do and question everything. Look, I presented at I presented at it might even have been that same conference. Part of what I learned in my doing the research for my dissertation was that the remedy pyrogenium and sepsin in I think it's the 1904. It's like a proceeding in the New York Homeopathic Society, New York
Mm.
State Homeopathic Society. I think that's where it is. Anyway, I'll have to look. It's referenced in my book, but they have this whole conversation about pyrogenium, which is made from rotten meat juice, and sepsin, which is made from the pus of a septic wound, that the pharmacies have gotten confused about which one is which. And so they've decided, since they don't know and don't know if the information comes from one or the other, that it must be the same because they're used to treat the same thing. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? Rotten meat juice and septic pus are not the same in my book. And neither one sounds pleasant, but not the same. And so I think that this part of the conversation is like not to say it's broken, but rather we need if like we're moving forward into this emerging like we have this is our chance, people. And we can either like do it in a shoddy way or we can own our limitations, right? Because medicine was different in the 19th century. And we can say, look, we ourselves recognize the limitations in this, and this is our plan to do it. But instead, I've just got a couple of examples of how I think we're going about it that maybe aren't the best thing. And look, I'm old now. Like, I'm at the end of my run with this. Alistair, also old. But like, We want to see this go on for the next generation or two or three. We don't want to have happen what happened in homeopathy in the 19th century. For those of you who don't know about this, history is always doomed to repeat itself unless we learn the lessons from it. And the reason that homeopathy is having a resurgence now, as opposed to being the dominant or concomitant paradigm with all the hospitals and the medical schools and all that, is that people stopped doing their due diligence and stopped prescribing according to best practices and Hahnemannian mandates. And they just made it up. And that's what people are doing now. So I was thinking about this. There's I was going to say little known fact about me, but maybe many people know this. People who are around me enough would know. I tend to be a little bit of a like a politics junkie. It's my sport. Not that I mean, I was going to say not that I have opinions. I mean, I like people to be nice, and I have a hard time when people aren't. It's sort of my guiding force. Anyway, but there's political science concept that I was thinking about, oh my gosh, I need to think about this in light of homeopathy. And some of you may know it. It's called the Overton window. And the Overton window basically describes how radical ideas gradually become socially acceptable. And I think in some ways that's what's happening in homeopathy, right? Like we are considered an outlier in the medical field, and because of a series of circumstances, medicine being challenged around lots of things, from everything from cost to the difficulty in treating autoimmune disease, all of the things. We know all those things. And so it's like we're homeopathy, which would be considered radical to many people, is now becoming socially acceptable. Because if you're really sick, that expression, teeth, tried everything else, try homeopathy, you get a good result and you're a convert and you don't really care how radical it seems. Okay, so I was thinking about, like, is there an inverse to the Overton effect, or are there risks associated with the Overton effect? And so I've been writing about this for the last week and really pondering this. So, a couple of thoughts. So, what happens? I was thinking about it as like the compression of a complex medical philosophy into an increasingly simplified, sort of fragmented thing that can survive within the modern culture. Or another way to look at it is like, here we are trying to gain legitimacy, right? But at the same time, we've got a whole bunch of people who are overly simplifying the theory in order to make it more palatable or usable. So, like, I'm all for free market capitalism, but I definitely think that we've got some issues because we've lost our thing. Anyway, and so what's happened is, like, we want everybody to love homeopathy. Lots of people who love homeopathy have no idea what it is or what makes it up, or that Hahnemann changed his mind about trituration, or don't repeat a remedy until its action is done, or whatever, right? And so we've simplified it and simplified it and simplified it until we moved away from our core. And I think that that's a challenge, you know?
Anti-Overton.
Say it again.
It's an anti-Overton.
It's the downstream problem associated with the Overton window. So I was thinking about this, right? And so I said, oh, it's kind of like fast food or like McDonald's. And so I just looked up, this is like, is there such a thing as like the McDonaldization? It turns out it is. Did you know this?
I know the term McDonaldization.
So I thought I made it up, but I didn't. It's been totally made up before. So the McDonaldization effect, it was started by this sociologist named George Ritzer. And it's a whole theory, and it's how complex systems become simplified for mass replication. I was like, oh my gosh. So I got in through the Overton window, and then I did like a weird Google, like, is there such a thing? Turns out there is. He was like probably from like Princeton or something, made his mark on it. Anyway, so he says there are four characteristics in this McDonaldization effect. One is you're creating things to be efficient, calculable, predictable, and to have control. Right. So that would make sense, like in this sort of mass replication kind of idea.
Yep.
So I was thinking, like, what does that look like in homeopathy? Well, you and I were talking about this the other day. We were sitting on the sofa when I was telling you about this, and we were making a list. So what we came up with, the McDonaldization of homeopathy includes remedy shortcuts, This we don't hear as much about anymore. This is kind of from our day, remedies based on personality lists or personality types, right? I wanted to have a book burning once, which sounds so bad, but like, when you have students who come to you and they quote from this like crap material, and you're like, oh, honey, I'm so sorry that this book exists. But okay, so that's another shortcut. 2D systems. This is what happens with like the periodic table. At a certain point, if people are using the periodic table as instead of an analysis and they're choosing a remedy that doesn't have a proving, or they're using that information, actually better is there's a remedy that has a proving, but instead of using the proving to understand why you prescribe it, they're looking at, well, this row in this column equals this prescription. And they don't even know what the remedy is about. That's just one example of the many 2D systems out there. Or the algorithmic repertory thing. This is kind of like the AI model, but there are people who are looking to like create this simplification because they believe the repertory is like an oracle, right? And the repertory is going to tell you exactly what you need. If you like put in the right symptoms, you'll get the right rubrics that's going to give you the right prescription. It's like, oh no. No. And just ask any student who's been to my clinic where I say, all right, people, today you are going through every rubric in the stool section. Today, you're going through every rubric in the whatever section. I want every word that could possibly mean whatever. And they have to go through and find it. And we do a critical analysis. And it turns out that you could move your analysis 180 degrees based on incorrect information that sounds exactly the same. All right. And then the last thing about the McDonaldization effect in homeopathy is the miasm checklists, right? So yeah. So what we're doing instead of learning, so like if we want to take this forward, people, if we want to do the real thing, get homeopathy back into the medical system and not have people who don't know how to do homeopathy opening these clinics and then doing mediocre homeopathy because you know what's going to happen? Exactly what happened before. Exactly.
Surely the ultimate McDonaldization feature is to attempt to turn it into an orthodox medical approach. This for that, it's
Totally.
an allopathic alternative when it's its own thing. You
It's
can't.
ham-handed or
It's
ham-fisted. Which do you
ham ham-handed. I think I'm a ham-handed kind of guy.
are you guys right in? Is it ham-handed or ham-fisted? What's your preference? So, so here, I just want to leave us with this. I've talked about this once before on here, but the Dunning-Kruger effect. And so if we go from whatever this inverse Overton window is, and we wind up with the McDonaldization, then the only thing that's left is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the tendency for individuals with limited knowledge or skills to overestimate their abilities, often failing to recognize their incompetence. And what's really interesting is that the inverse, experts may underestimate their relative competence because they are aware of the inherent complexity of what they do. So, guys, like that to me is like so important because right now, homeopathy is being run by the influencer class. There are people who get on their platform and they make all sorts of claims. And when we are feeling weak or our kids are suffering, we will do anything that we can. So if somebody gives us hope, we're going to go for it. And we're going to give these people our hard-earned money and we're going to put our trust in them. But the problem is that right now, like false confidence is kind of rewarded. So if you're looking for a homeopath, I would say go for the person who has humility, not hubris. I mean, if I give everybody the opportunity to punch me in the nose if I start to have hubris about the practice of homeopathy for myself. I'm often terrified with the level of care that's required for the people that come our way.
Hmm.
I, I have a healthy respect for what we do, I think Al, I think you're in the same situation. We just work really hard at it and we don't assume we know. And we spend a lot of time working on our cases. I think that this lack of humility is really terrifying. So I'm going to close us out with a request again. And I mentioned this, like we need to sort of focus on the gap between our actual competence and knowledge in homeopathy and what we wish to be true, right? And we need to do the work to fill that gap. And there's so much work to be done. And so I don't think that we serve this profession by going out and pretending we know what we're doing when we don't, or given remedies that maybe don't have a good proving. If somebody comes to you and says they've got a C4 trituration proving, or they're going to clear all of these diseases, from your past history by giving you a bunch of nosodes and medicines that your grandparents had that are given to you in potency and going to tell you that that's going to work, I'd ask a lot of questions before I would put that pill in my mouth or, God forbid, give it to a child, right? It's really important. But what we can do is say, what is the capacity within this? Or let's do a critical analysis of all of these medicines and say, which ones need better provings? Let's reinstate the Provers Guilds. Let's get a systematic approach to doing this. Let's get our research to not just be, we're going to, spend all our time trying to prove mechanisms of action to people who literally don't give a shit about it, but rather to say, if we approach this medicine in the best way possible, right, then it's going to be undeniable. It's undeniable in our practices when people get better, we measure the outcomes, and then our practices are so busy because they're sending their friends because they've had a good response. What's happening outside of that is a little bit scary. So let's work together toward it. Our not-for-profit, I mentioned to you before, advancedhomeopathy.org. If you are a homeopath, right, join our practitioner-generated research network, the PGRN. We are working so hard to train people. We're getting people ethics training. We're working on, showing people how that they can evaluate their cases. We offer so much support to people in the profession so that we can do a good job, right? We don't want to lead with unconscious incompetence, right? We want to be consciously competent and we want to help people on the arc to getting there. Wow. This is what happens when you go out for breakfast with one of your friends and you drink caffeinated coffee and come home and have a cup of tea.
You're on a roll.
I really am. I hope that wasn't too much. Anyway,
No, it's good. Really appreciate it. Um, I which was
Dunning-Kruger, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
two different people.
Dunning-Kruger, they work together. Let me see. There is a lot written about the Dunning-Kruger effect.
No, I was just wondering if one was advocating for one side and one was advocating for the other.
No, 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 no. No,
It was just together they came up with this tension. I love it. It's so I really I think it describes exactly what's going on. Mm.
And this is the thing, like, back in the day when homeopaths were accused of being charlatans or quacks or mountebanks, this whole idea is that we're kind of pretending to do something that we don't, or that, that we're selling nostrums, which are sort of fake medicines. And it's actually not true, right? Homeopathy at its core is the most incredible and beautiful healing modality. It just is. But that's homeopathy at its core. Once you take it to the periphery and start, pretending to be a jazz musician when you're at a classical concert, right? Like, and with no skills, it'd be like coming into, a beautiful orchestra, bringing like a washboard and a broom and just like jumping all around the place, making noise. That's kind of the analogy of what's happening. And people, it would be one thing if it was just like people vying for market share. That's not what it's about. This is fake medicine. It's fake medicine, right? We know someone who is literally wearing a doctor's coat, pretending to be something that she most certainly is not. So, like, people are that's what the That's where the charlatan stuff comes from, isn't it? So, those same people, they're really, if they've got a lot of market share, it's because they do something right. But do you want a person who's good at marketing or a person who's really good at homeopathy? You know? Mhm. I did turn on my light to try to be better at that. You can see in my glasses, see the little ring, but I
Your light looks great.
does it? Thank you. Yeah, I'm working hard at that. All right, keep writing in. Your questions are amazing. And if you're interested in studying homeopathy, hit us up. We do our fourth semester is open to any qualified homeopath. We do clinical training and stuff. And again, all of our clinical stuff is a not-for-profit. So we're really invested in quality. Yeah.
All
All
right,
right.
folks. It's lunchtime. It's also time for my second cup of tea.
I'll have another.
Great. All
Hope
right.
you have
See you
a
next
great
time.
week,
Ciao.
people. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Got a packed schedule, but still dreaming of becoming a homeopath? AHE's part-time professional program brings real-time classes, live clinical training, and a full professional curriculum, all 100% online. It's rigorous. It's legit. And yes, it's built for people who have jobs, kids, lives, and a whole lot of ambition. Start your journey to licensure without hitting pause on your life. Visit ahe.online and take the first step.